Lena married her husband's father, just 2 days after Joel was murdered. Frank pulled the trigger, but was he the only one who wanted Joel dead? Meera saw something she was never meant to see. Chase was paid to keep his mouth shut. And now, in the quiet town of Maple Heights, every smile hides a secret. This is the chilling story of betrayal, greed, and a twisted love that ended in blood. He married her father-in-law 2 days after her husband was murdered, and that was only the beginning. Maple Heights was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and waved at strangers from freshly mowed lawns. Nestled between two sleepy counties, it was a picture-perfect suburb, with trimmed hedges, backyard barbecues, and the sound of sprinklers echoing at dawn. Life moved slowly there. Predictably, safely. At least that's what everyone believed, until the events of late September shattered that illusion forever. At the heart of the neighborhood stood a charming colonial-style home with white shutters and a red door. It belonged to Lena Hartley, a reserved but elegant woman in her early 30s, and her husband Joel, a popular real estate agent known for his charisma and wide smile. They had lived in Maple Heights for 6 years, blending seamlessly into the community's rhythm. They were admired, envied even, for their seemingly perfect marriage. Joel, with his success and charm, and Lena with her calm presence and graceful manner, had become local icons of stability. Just a few blocks away lived Frank Hartley, Joel's father, a tall, rugged man in his late 60s. Frank was a retired firefighter who had served the town for over 3 decades. Widowed for nearly 10 years, he spent his days tending to his garden, fixing things around the neighborhood, and occasionally helping out at the local fire station. He had a stern presence, the kind that carried unspoken authority, but those who knew him well said he had a soft heart beneath the hardened exterior. He and Lena shared a quiet bond since Joel traveled often for work. Neighbors thought nothing of it. It made sense. After all, Frank had no other family. Then there was Meera, Lena's best friend since college. She lived 3 houses down, and had practically become a part of the Hartley household. Sharp-witted and observant, Meera often helped Lena with errands or stayed over when Joel was away. She was loyal to Lena in a way that bordered on protective, always quick to defend her and slow to trust others. Meera didn't talk much about her own life, but people noticed how closely she watched everything around her. On the edge of the neighborhood, near a row of mechanic shops and gas stations, worked Chase, tall and quiet with grease-stained hands. Chase was known more for his silence than his skill with engines. He kept to himself, rarely made eye contact, and only spoke when necessary. Still, there was something about him, some unreadable layer that made people uneasy. He lived alone in a tiny apartment above the garage, and though he wasn't close to anyone, he was always around, watching. Together, these 5 individuals formed a quiet constellation in the calm sky of Maple Heights. Nothing about their daily lives suggested scandal or violence. No one could have predicted that a storm was quietly brewing, one that would turn neighbors into suspects and loved ones into liars. But behind the white fences and polite smiles, secrets had begun to take root. In the weeks leading up to the murder, some neighbors had noticed small, strange things. Frank was seen late at night walking near Lena and Joel's house, when he had no reason to be there. Lena stopped attending the Wednesday book club she had never missed. Meera began checking her phone more often, sometimes looking shaken after doing so. And Chase had started pointing a new security camera toward Joel's driveway. When asked, he said there had been a break-in nearby, but no police reports ever confirmed that. No one thought to connect these threads, not until Joel was found dead in his own driveway, a single gunshot wound to the chest. No signs of forced entry, no witness, just silence, and then the sirens. What happened that morning would trigger a chain of events that would unravel friendships, destroy trust, and reveal a relationship so twisted, so unexpected, that even the most imaginative minds in Maple Heights couldn't have written it themselves. And at the center of it all stood Lena, mourning her husband, holding her secrets tightly, while preparing to marry the last man anyone would ever suspect. The rain began before sunrise, a soft drizzle that turned the streets of Maple Heights slick and quiet. It was the kind of morning that made people want to stay in bed a little longer, sip coffee a little slower. But for Lena Hartley, June 3rd would begin not with warmth or comfort, but with a scream. At 6:12 a.m., a single 911 call shattered the silence. The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless. Lena's words came in gasps. Her husband, Joel, was lying in the driveway. He wasn't moving, there was blood. She didn't know what happened, she just knew he was cold. By the time the first responders arrived, a small crowd of sleepy-eyed neighbors had gathered in the street, holding umbrellas and murmuring behind gloved hands. Flashing red and blue lights bounced off rain-soaked windows as officers cordoned off the area. Joel's body was slumped beside his black SUV, a neat bullet wound in his chest. The car door was open, keys still in the ignition. His watch, wallet and phone were untouched. There were no skid marks, no footprints, just the eerie stillness of death. Lena stood on the front steps, soaked from the rain, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her. Her hands trembled as she spoke to detectives. She said she had woken up alone in bed and assumed Joel had gone to the gym early, as he often did. But something felt off. The house was too quiet. She looked out the bedroom window and saw him lying there. At first she thought he had slipped, but then she saw the blood. Paramedics confirmed what was already clear. Joel had been dead for hours. Time of death was estimated around 2. The weapon was nowhere to be found. Lena swore she hadn't heard anything unusual that night. No gunshot, no car, nothing. She had taken a sleeping pill around midnight, and hadn't stirred once until dawn. Detectives took notes, their expressions unreadable. Lena's grief was raw, but there was something careful about it. She answered questions, but only exactly what was asked. No more, no less. She cried but without sobbing. Her hands clutched the blanket tightly, but were otherwise clean. Too clean. Frank arrived just after 7. When he saw his son's body, he dropped to his knees. The rain drenched his flannel shirt and soaked through to his bones. But he didn't move. For several minutes he sat beside Joel's lifeless form, whispering something no one could hear. When he finally stood, his eyes were dry and fierce. He walked straight to the lead detective, and demanded to know who did it. Police began canvassing the neighborhood. Door-to-door questions. Any cameras, any unusual sounds. Most residents were asleep during the critical hours. Nothing suspicious was reported, except one thing. Across the street, a camera had been installed above a garage just 2 weeks prior. It belonged to Chase, the quiet mechanic. He lived alone, never interacted much with the neighbors, but his camera faced directly toward the Hartley property. When officers asked to see the footage, Chase hesitated. He said the camera wasn't working that night due to a power surge. The detectives noted the excuse, thanked him, and left. But their interest had been piqued. Back at the station, officers reviewed Joel's record. His phone showed no recent threats. His business dealings appeared clean. No enemies, no lawsuits, no criminal history. The only odd thing was an unusually large life insurance policy, taken out just 8 months prior, worth nearly 7. The sole beneficiary was Lena. That same afternoon, Meera arrived at the Hartley home. She wrapped Lena in a hug, and didn't ask questions. She made tea, closed the curtains, and turned off the news. But even Meera, who had known Lena for years, couldn't shake a strange feeling. Something wasn't adding up. The town buzzed with whispers. If it wasn't a robbery and it wasn't random, then who wanted Joel dead? Why would someone execute a man in his own driveway and leave no trace? And why, in a place as safe and quiet as Maple Heights, had no one heard a sound? As the rain continued to fall and the sun failed to break through the thick gray clouds, one thing was becoming clear to investigators. This was no accident. This was planned, precise, personal, and someone in Maple Heights was hiding more than just grief. The days following Joel Hartley's murder felt surreal to the residents of Maple Heights. Grief mingled with fear, and curiosity burned quietly behind shuttered windows. The story gripped the town like a vice. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Memorial flowers appeared on the Hartleys' lawn, and the neighborhood watched with uneasy sympathy as Lena kept to herself, barely seen beyond brief moments at the front door or during short walks with Meera. But the police weren't resting. Behind the scenes, a more complex picture was beginning to emerge. When detectives returned to speak with Chase, the mechanic who lived across the street, They weren't there for polite conversation. His garage camera facing directly toward the Hartley driveway had potential to be the case's first break. During the initial interview, Chase claimed a power surge knocked out the camera during the night of the murder. The detectives had let it slide for the moment, but that claim didn't sit right. They obtained a search warrant, and a forensic team swept through Chase's apartment and workspace. It didn't take long to discover that the power in his building had been stable all night. According to the utility company, there had been no surge, no outage, which meant the camera should have worked just fine. Now the question was, why had he lied? When the footage was finally pulled from the hard drive, the images were grainy but clear enough to show movement. At exactly 2:17 a.m., someone appeared in frame, walking toward the Hartley home. The person wore a hooded jacket, face obscured, body language calm and deliberate, but there was one telltale detail, a noticeable limp in the left leg. Slow, uneven steps. Investigators compared the footage to town records, emergency logs, and personal details about those connected to Joel. It was Lena's father-in-law Frank Hartley, who had sustained a serious leg injury during a warehouse fire 14 years earlier. He walked with a subtle but permanent limp. Most neighbors didn't notice it anymore, but cameras didn't forget. The detectives confronted Frank later that week. He denied everything, claimed he was home, asleep. No witnesses could confirm or deny it. He lived alone. When shown a still image from the footage, he dismissed it as coincidence. Lots of people limped, he said. It could be anyone. But as investigators looked further into Frank's past, something else surfaced. He had recently taken out a private loan against his house, nearly $80,000, and much of it had vanished within weeks. No purchases, no paper trail, no explanation. At the same time, text records from a burner phone, retrieved through a digital forensic specialist, revealed several encrypted messages sent to a number traced back to a prepaid device registered under Chase's initials. The content of the messages was vague but hinted at coordination. Mentions of timing, watch the house, and one that read, simply, he leaves early, window is small, be ready. The police now had 3 pieces of a puzzle: Frank's limp matching the figure in the camera footage, his financial stress, and a possible secret communication link to Chase. It wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was enough to warrant deeper investigation. Meanwhile, Lena's behavior continued to confuse those around her. She didn't speak to reporters. She refused counseling offered by the church. She barely even cried at Joel's memorial service, which was attended by nearly the entire town. When asked how she was holding up, she always gave the same answer: one day at a time. It was robotic, controlled. Meera stayed close to Lena, but even she started to notice strange inconsistencies. Lena would forget simple facts, like what time she said she went to bed the night of the murder, or which neighbor she claimed had dropped off soup that afternoon. The lies weren't big, but they were frequent, almost as if she were keeping a mental script and struggling to stick to it. Chase, meanwhile, stopped showing up at work. His garage remained shuttered. Some neighbors thought he was grieving in private, others suspected he was hiding something. What no one knew, not yet, was that everything was connected: the limp, the lies, the silence, and the camera that should have never worked, but did. Something was closing in. The truth was starting to rise, but the cost of unearthing it would be more than Maple Heights was ready to pay. 2 days after Joel Hartley was buried beneath gray skies and a marble headstone, a piece of news hit Maple Heights like a tidal wave. Lena Hartley had remarried, not quietly, not after time had passed, not out of the blue, but deliberately, secretly, and to someone unthinkable: Frank Hartley, her deceased husband's father. The shock was instant. Neighbors whispered behind drawn curtains. Social media exploded. The local paper printed the headline in bold ink across the front page. It was almost too strange to believe, like something torn from a courtroom drama or a late-night thriller. Yet it was real, documented by a courthouse signature and a marriage certificate filed just 48 hours after Joel's funeral. No guests, no announcement, just 2 signatures and a quiet courthouse clerk, who later told reporters that Lena never once looked up from the paperwork. The community's disbelief turned quickly to disgust. How could she move on so quickly, and with her husband's father? People who had once brought casseroles to her doorstep and offered condolences, now crossed the street to avoid her. Children whispered about her as the Black Widow. Her house, once a symbol of domestic bliss, became the center of town gossip and speculation. The police, meanwhile, watched the development with renewed interest. This wasn't just scandalous, it was strategic. Legally, Lena had no claim to Joel's estate under the conditions of his recently updated will, which stated all benefits would go to charity if he died by unnatural means. But marriage to Frank, Joel's next of kin, positioned her differently. If Frank inherited, then by marriage, so would she. But something about the timing didn't sit right. Marrying so soon before the investigation had even concluded wasn't just odd, it was dangerous. It painted a target on their backs. It screamed motive. When confronted by detectives, Lena remained composed. She said the marriage had been an impulsive act born from grief, that she and Frank had bonded over shared pain and found comfort in each other's presence. She claimed Joel's death had shattered her so deeply that she had clung to the only person who understood her loss. Frank echoed the same sentiment. He spoke in low, measured tones about loss, about healing, about the unexpected ways love can grow from tragedy. His words were calm, but his eyes never quite matched the emotion. There was a coldness behind them that didn't go unnoticed by investigators. But beneath the public explanations and private discomfort, something deeper was taking shape. Meera, once Lena's closest friend, had begun to pull away. She visited less frequently, her calls slowed, and when she did come by she stayed quiet, observant. She asked few questions, but noticed everything. How Lena avoided eye contact, how Frank had started moving personal items into the house even before the funeral, how boxes of Joel's things were packed away the morning after his body was buried. Behind closed doors, Meera began piecing together her own theory, one that made her sick to her stomach. She remembered offhand comments Lena had made in recent months about Joel's long hours, about feeling lonely, misunderstood. She remembered how often Frank had visited while Joel was away on business, how he stayed longer each time. And then there was the smallest detail, one Meera couldn't shake. The night before the murder, she had seen Frank's truck parked around the corner from the Hartley house, engine off, lights dimmed. At the time it seemed like nothing. Now it felt like a silent alarm bell she hadn't known how to hear. The police didn't yet have enough for charges. Suspicion wasn't proof. A strange marriage wasn't a confession. But something about the sequence, Joel's sudden murder, a camera's half-truth, a rushed remarriage, was forming a timeline that made one thing clear. Lena and Frank weren't just mourning Joel's death, they were rewriting the story of it, together. And as whispers turned into accusations, and the truth slithered just beneath the surface, one thing was certain: whatever happened that night on the driveway had been planned. Now the only question was how far they were willing to go to keep it buried. The investigation into Joel Hartley's murder had reached a strange and dangerous stalemate. Detectives were working behind the scenes, but publicly there were no arrests, no suspects, and no new statements. All anyone had were rumors and a marriage that defied explanation. Lena Hartley, now Lena Hartley Sr. by law, had sealed her future to Frank just 2 days after burying her husband. That act alone had fractured any sense of normalcy left in Maple Heights. But not everyone had moved on. Meera hadn't let go of the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She had begun keeping her own notes, scribbled thoughts on scraps of paper, newspaper clippings, overheard comments, and timelines. It wasn't just about Lena and Frank, it was about the entire web that had formed around Joel's murder, and the pieces that didn't quite fit. And now, Meera was beginning to suspect that someone else might be hiding more than they let on. Chase, the mechanic, he hadn't been seen in nearly a week. His garage remained closed, and his apartment lights never turned on. No one knew if he had skipped town or was simply hiding in plain sight. But Meera couldn't ignore the fact that Chase had installed a new security camera weeks before the murder, aimed directly at Joel's driveway, and then, conveniently, claimed it had malfunctioned. Meera decided to visit the garage, just to. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find, but she couldn't ignore the tight feeling in her chest, the instinct that something had been missed. The garage was quiet, the bay doors locked from the inside, but Meera noticed the side door was slightly ajar. Her pulse quickened. She stepped inside cautiously. The air smelled of oil and dust. Tools were scattered across a steel table, and a thick layer of grime covered the floor. But it wasn't the mess that caught her attention. It was what was on the monitor mounted on the wall. The camera feed, still recording, and worse, playback available. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled back to the night of Joel's death. She recognized the grainy footage, a shadowed figure moving across the screen, a limp in the left leg. But now, with better light on the screen and closer detail, she noticed something else, something she hadn't expected. There were two figures. The first was the limping man easily assumed to be Frank. The second came 10 minutes later, wearing a dark hoodie, standing near the side of the house, waiting, watching. Eventually the second figure moved in the direction of Joel's SUV, and disappeared from view just moments before the estimated time of the gunshot. Meera felt her stomach twist. If there were two people on that property during the time of the murder, then Frank hadn't acted alone, and Chase, who claimed the footage didn't exist, had clearly been hiding this from the beginning. She copied the footage onto a portable USB and slipped out the door before anyone could see her. Her heart pounded all the way home. Meanwhile, detectives were beginning to revisit earlier assumptions. They had initially been focused on Frank as the central figure, his limp, his financial troubles, the bizarre marriage, but now, with the footage Meera handed over anonymously, a different question emerged. Who was the second person? And even more unsettling, why hadn't Chase ever mentioned it? The detectives confronted him 3 days later. He had been staying with a cousin in a nearby town, avoiding the media storm. When pressed, he finally admitted to knowing more than he'd let on. He said Frank approached him months earlier, offering cash to watch the house and report Joel's schedule. He insisted he didn't know anything about a plan to kill, that he never agreed to anything beyond surveillance, but he admitted to deleting parts of the footage after realizing what had happened. He was arrested for obstruction of justice. As word of his arrest spread, the town erupted in speculation again. Now it wasn't just Lena and Frank, it was Chase too. What began as a tragic murder had evolved into a layered conspiracy, and every new discovery twisted the story even further. Yet despite the growing evidence, Lena remained untouched. She smiled politely when seen in public. She attended church once more. She posted nothing on social media, and she never spoke to reporters. But inside her perfectly arranged home, behind closed curtains, she kept a burner phone hidden beneath a floorboard, and every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., it buzzed, just once. No name, no words, just a message. Still clean. Heights had begun to rot beneath its surface. What had once been a quiet suburban community now pulsed with unease. The murder of Joel Hartley had changed everything, but it was the aftermath, the remarriage, the arrests, the lies that truly haunted its streets. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Doors were locked earlier. Conversations dropped to whispers anytime Lena or Frank's names were mentioned. The police now had Chase in custody, held on obstruction charges, but he refused to offer anything more. He maintained that he had simply deleted footage out of fear and claimed he didn't know who the second figure on the video was. His lawyer said he had nothing to gain by speaking further, and possibly everything to lose. The detectives knew he was lying, but without solid proof, they could only hold him for so long. What they did have was the video footage Meera had retrieved, showing two individuals present near the Hartley home the night Joel was killed, one with a limp, almost certainly Frank, the other still unidentified, dressed in black, silent, precise. That second person was now the missing link. Frank's story, when revisited under pressure, began to crack. He continued to deny being near the house that night. He offered no alibi and blamed the camera footage on someone trying to frame him. When asked why he married Lena so quickly, he said grief made people do irrational things, but his answers were too neat, too rehearsed. And worse, investigators learned that Frank had once worked for a private security firm, a place that trained him in surveillance, threat management, and tactical evasion. He wasn't just a grieving father, he was someone who knew how to disappear in plain sight. Still, none of it directly connected him to the murder, and Lena remained a ghost in the investigation. Calm, unshaken, perfectly composed, her public behavior never slipped. She wore black, kept her hair pulled back, and always said the right things. She was mourning, she was rebuilding. She was a woman people couldn't quite bring themselves to accuse, but couldn't stop suspecting. Meera, now fully convinced Lena was involved, continued digging on her own. She started with financial records. Joel had taken out a $750,000 life insurance policy months before his death. Frank was not mentioned in the policy, but Lena was. However, the company had flagged the payout due to the suspicious circumstances surrounding Joel's death. Until the murder was officially solved, the money remained in limbo. But Meera discovered something else. Frank had recently applied for an emergency line of credit, citing expected settlement as justification. It was clear they were counting on the money. Then came a break. A neighbor 4 houses down, an elderly woman named Miss Clayton, came forward with something odd.
She had found a black hoodie stuffed into a garden waste bin 3 mornings after the murder. At the time she assumed it belonged to her grandson, and tossed it in the garage. But when she saw the video still from the news showing the second hooded figure, she began to wonder. Detectives rushed to collect the hoodie. It was old, wet from the rain that week, but still intact. Forensic testing revealed a single strand of long blonde hair inside the hood, as well as faint traces of gunpowder residue along the left sleeve. Lena's hair was long and blonde. The hoodie, the footage, the obstruction from Chase and Frank's unexplained movements, everything was lining up, piece by piece, but the most damning revelation came from Chase's seized phone. Tucked away in a hidden messaging app was a deleted photo, restored by forensic. It showed a handwritten note, one that read clean, "Joel leaves at 2:15, you know what to do." The note had Lena's handwriting. That evidence was enough to open a new line of inquiry, and place Lena squarely at the center of the plot. Detectives secured a warrant to search the Hartley residence once more. They combed through closets, floorboards, drawers, and in a locked jewelry box beneath Lena's vanity, they found a second burner phone. Its screen was cracked, battery nearly dead, but its contents spoke volumes. Message after message from Frank, from Chase, and one unsent draft from Lena that read simply, "I can't go back." It had to be done. The walls were closing in, the web was tightening, and for the first time since Joel's death, Lena Hartley looked afraid.
The sun barely rose on the morning police returned to the Hartley home with a second warrant. Fog clung the street like a warning, and the silence around Maple Heights was unnerving. Word of the investigation's progress had begun to leak. People no longer spoke of Joel Hartley as just an unlucky victim of a random attack. They whispered about murder for money, deception in marriage, and the quiet cruelty hidden behind calm smiles. Lena stood at her front door in a beige sweater and pearl earrings, appearing every bit the composed widow-turned-wife. She said nothing as detectives entered. Frank was out, no one knew where. His phone was off. His truck missing. Lena claimed she hadn't seen him since the night before, but this time her voice didn't have its usual steady edge. There was something frayed in it, something almost tired. Inside the house, the search was meticulous. Detectives opened every drawer, checked under every bed, scanned computers and tablets, and lifted floorboards where they could. Most rooms were spotless, too spotless, as if someone had taken great care to erase their presence. But one closet in the guest bedroom had a loose panel, and behind it, officers found what they hadn't expected. A backpack. Inside were latex gloves, a burner phone charger, and a small black pistol wrapped in an old kitchen towel. The gun matched the caliber used in Joel's murder. Ballistics would later confirm it was the exact weapon. But in that moment, detectives already knew they had something game-changing. Lena was placed under house arrest while forensic analysis progressed. She was no longer free to roam the neighborhood, to walk to the store, to pretend normal life continued. An ankle monitor was attached. Cameras were installed around the property, and Lena for the first time had no control over how she was seen. Meera watched the news unfold from her small living room. Her hands trembled. She had known, at least in her gut, that Lena was involved, but now it was more than intuition. The pieces had begun to align into a chilling reality. Joel hadn't been a victim of random violence. He had been a target, and his wife had helped pull the trigger, perhaps not literally, but in every way that mattered. Meanwhile, Frank remained missing. His disappearance became the new focal point of the investigation. A manhunt was launched. His bank accounts were frozen. His home was searched. Inside his garage, a second vehicle was discovered. An old black sedan registered under a fake name. The plates were removed, and the interior had been wiped clean. But what they couldn't wipe were fragments of hair stuck in the seatbelt, a faint blood stain under the floor mat, and a used syringe in the glove compartment. Toxicology reports would reveal the syringe contained a fast-acting sedative, enough to incapacitate a grown man. Joel had no drugs in his system at the time of death, but this discovery shifted suspicions. Had Frank used the drug on someone else, or was he planning another disappearance? Theories ran wild, but the biggest twist hadn't arrived yet. Back at police headquarters, Chase finally broke. Faced with a longer sentence and the weight of mounting evidence, he confessed to everything. He admitted that Frank had approached him first, offering money to help monitor Joel's schedule, but Lena was the one who escalated things. She orchestrated the timeline, pressured Frank, and insisted Joel wasn't going to give her a future. Chase claimed he didn't know murder was the end goal until it was too late. His voice cracked when he spoke of Lena's coldness, how she never cried, never hesitated, just gave orders. What haunted him most, he said, was the way she smiled after the murder. She didn't lose a husband, he told police. She lost an obstacle. The confession was damning. It provided motive, planning and corroboration. It tied Lena and Frank together in a pact far deeper than grief. As the final pieces locked into place, detectives prepared for the inevitable. Warrants for arrest, charges for conspiracy, murder and obstruction, a town waiting for justice, and a woman who had tried to rewrite a future at the cost of another man's life. Lena's mask was breaking, and the truth underneath was darker than anyone imagined. The day Lena Hartley was arrested, the skies over Maple Heights turned an eerie slate gray, as though the town itself had been holding its breath, and now exhaled in grief and relief. News trucks lined the street before dawn. Cameras rolled silently as Lena, in her soft pink robe and slippers, was led out of the house in handcuffs. She didn't fight. She didn't cry. She walked slowly, her face blank, like a woman who had finally stopped pretending. The charges were staggering: first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, destruction of evidence, and obstruction of justice. Her mugshot appeared everywhere within hours. The once beloved daughter-in-law, the sympathetic widow, the polished newlywed, was now the centerpiece of a murder case that stunned the nation. But while Lena's arrest was a turning point, it wasn't the end. Frank Hartley was still out there. Days passed, then a week, then two. No sighting, no credit card activity, no phone pings. It was as if he had evaporated. The police sent bulletins across state lines. Frank's photo circulated through airports and border checkpoints, but he was always one step ahead. Whoever helped plan a murder with such precision likely knew how to disappear just as carefully. But Frank hadn't accounted for everything. A call came in from a small motel outside of Tulsa, Oklahoma. A guest using a fake name had checked in and never returned for his key deposit. The motel manager, suspicious of the guest's erratic behavior, had jotted down the license plate. It matched the fake registration found in Frank's garage. Within hours, U.S. Marshals tracked Frank to a remote storage facility 15 miles away. He was found sleeping in the back of a rented moving truck, surrounded by cash, fake IDs, and an unregistered shotgun. He didn't resist arrest. He barely spoke. During interrogation, Frank gave the investigators nothing. No emotion, no admission, only one quiet statement before requesting a lawyer. "She made me believe we had no other way." When the trial began, it was the event of the decade for the small town. Reporters camped outside the courthouse. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. The prosecution called it cold-blooded, calculated, a murder rooted not in passion, but ambition. They laid out the timeline with chilling clarity. Lena and Frank had begun an affair almost a year before Joel's death. It started in secret, stolen glances, and whispered meetings, but quickly turned into something more dangerous. Joel was seen as an obstacle, a complication, and soon, a target. The insurance money was the bait, but control was the real prize. Lena wanted the house, the money, the image. Frank wanted Lena. They both wanted Joel gone. Chase's testimony was the nail in the coffin. He recounted every moment, from the first payment to the final text from Lena that read, "He's on his way, do it fast." When the courtroom heard those words aloud, a collective chill passed through the gallery. The defense tried to spin the story, arguing that Lena had been manipulated by Frank, that she was grieving and unstable, that Chase was the real architect of the murder, but none of it held. The evidence was too precise. The footage, the hoodie, the hidden phone, the backpack, and the texts. So many texts. Lena was found guilty on all counts. Frank was found guilty as well, though his sentence was slightly reduced for eventual cooperation. Chase, though remorseful, received time too. The justice system had spoken, but no sentence could bring Joel Hartley back. Meera stood at the back of the courtroom during the verdict, tears silently falling. She had once trusted Lena, once sat at her table, laughed in her kitchen. Now, all she saw was a stranger, a woman who had smiled through betrayal, who had orchestrated a murder with the calm of a chess player. After the trial, Lena was taken to a maximum security prison. She would never walk Maple Heights again, but her story lingered, in whispered conversations, in empty driveways, in the silence between neighbors, a tale of love twisted into greed and ambition that ended in blood.